Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're diving into a really massive, honestly mandatory upgrade in the world of digital security. We're unpacking Chapter 7 of our source text, which goes incredibly deep into public key encryption and digital signatures. But specifically, we are zoning in on the modern marvel that is ECC. That's Elliptic Curve Cryptography. Think about this. If your phone used the older traditional encryption methods for every single secure message you sent today, well, your battery would literally be dead before you even made it to lunch. The computational weight is just way too heavy for modern devices. So today, we're exploring the mathematical miracle that prevents your phone from dying, uncovering exactly how your devices secure your most private data at absolute lightning speeds. I want you to imagine your digital security as a vintage station wagon. You know, it's built like an absolute tank, it reliably gets you from point A to point B, and frankly, it has protected our digital lives for decades. That station wagon is RSA encryption. But what if the landscape changes? What if suddenly you need to compete in a Formula One race, navigating hairpin turns at 200 miles an hour? A clunky station wagon just isn't going to cut it, right? You need a high-performance, lightweight, meticulously engineered sports car. And that sports car is Elliptic Curve Cryptography, or ECC. It was designed from the ground up for the high-speed, low-power demands of our modern computing era, completely shedding the bulk while maintaining absolute safety. All right, here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with an introduction to elliptic curves, then lightly touch on the math behind ECC, look at how we create a shared secret, dive into digital signatures in Java, and finally do a showdown between RSA and ECC. Okay, Section 1. Introduction to elliptic curves. Let's look at exactly where this standard came from and how it evolved. So ECC is actually older than you might think. It was invented way back in 1985 by two mathematicians, Victor Miller and Neil Koblitz, and they actually came up with it completely independently of one another. But here's the thing. Back in the 80s, computers were massive towers plugged directly into the walls of universities and office buildings. Nobody really cared about battery drain. CPUs had dedicated, unlimited power supplies to crunch through heavy math. Because of that, the older standard RSA completely ruled the roost. It was trusted, it was established. It wasn't until around 2004 when we started putting supercomputers into our pockets that the tech industry kind of panicked. Mobile devices just could not handle RSA's giant cryptographic keys. Doing the math to encrypt a single message with RSA required so much processing power that it literally drained smartphone batteries and generated excess heat. The industry desperately needed a lightweight alternative, and so ECC was finally pulled off the shelf to save the mobile revolution. And, looking toward the future, both RSA and ECC face a looming existential threat from quantum computing, which we are absolutely going to address before we wrap up today. Moving right along to Section 2, the math behind ECC. And don't worry, we are keeping this entirely conceptual. When cryptographers talk about an elliptic curve, they aren't speaking metaphorically. They mean a literal, swooping curve plotted on a mathematical graph. Curve 25519 is one of the most famous examples out there. This specific, undulating shape has some really incredible geometric properties. Without getting too bogged down, basically, if you take any 2 points on this curve and draw a straight line through them, that line will always intersect the curve at a third point. By reflecting that point across an axis, you can mathematically add points together, endlessly bouncing around the curve in a way that seems totally chaotic to an outside observer, but is actually entirely deterministic if you know the starting variables. This exact shape is highly efficient for low-powered devices, and it's famously the bedrock of secure communications in apps you probably use every day, like WhatsApp and Signal. Now, the entire security of this system rests on a mouthful of a concept called the elliptic curve discrete logarithm problem, but think of it simply like mixing paint. If I give you a bucket of a very specific, unique shade of purple, and I tell you it was made by mixing a certain red and a certain blue thousands of times, well, it was incredibly easy for me to mix that paint in one direction, but it's almost impossible for you to unmix it. You can't just look at that final bucket of purple and figure out my exact starting ratio. Bouncing around the elliptic curve works the exact same way. An attacker can see your final point on the graph, but working backward to figure out how many times you added the original point to itself, it's computationally unfeasible. It would literally take classical supercomputers millions of years to unmix that mathematical paint. Now, a really important point for developers, you do not have to invent this math from scratch. In fact, writing your own cryptographic math is notoriously dangerous. Please don't do it. Instead, global cryptographers have thoroughly tested and approved specific curves, and developers just choose from an established list. For instance, Curve 25519 is your go-to for lightning-fast secure messaging.
Curve 448 Goldilocks is designed for extreme paranoid-level security. P256 is the rigorous standard required by the US government. And CP256K1, that is the specific curve that secures every single Bitcoin wallet on the planet. The key here is that for two devices to talk to each other securely, they have to agree on the exact same curve. It's exactly like agreeing to play the exact same sheet music before starting a piano duet. If one computer plays Bach and the other plays Beethoven, the math won't align and you're just left with digital noise.
Let's move to Section 3, creating a shared secret. This is where we see ECC's first major superpower in action. To establish a shared secret over a completely hostile open network, systems use ACDH, which stands for Elliptic Curve Diffie-Hellman, and this algorithm honestly feels like a magic trick. Imagine you need to hand a physical vault key to your friend, but they're across a crowded room full of spies, and everyone is watching your every single move. If you throw the key, a spy catches it. If you yell out the combination, a spy hears it. ECDH is the magic trick that allows both of you to suddenly hold identical vault keys in your hands without ever throwing anything across the room. If standard AES encryption is the impenetrable steel lock on your data, ECDH is the brilliant mathematical process that securely materializes the key for that lock right out of thin air. So how does that magic trick actually play out between two servers? Let's call them Alice and Bob. Step 1, they agree on the curve. They pull out the same sheet music. Step 2, they exchange their public keys over the open internet. Now, spies and attackers can absolutely see these public keys in transit, and that is perfectly fine. Step 3 is the magic. Alice takes her private key and mathematically mixes it with Bob's public key. At the exact same time, Bob mixes his private key with Alice's public key. Because of how the geometric properties of the elliptic curve work, they both mathematically land on the exact same coordinate on the graph. They independently arrive at the identical shared secret, leaving the eavesdroppers with nothing but useless public keys that, like we talked about earlier, cannot be reverse engineered. All right, Section 4, digital signatures and Java. Because encrypting secrets is really only half the battle. We also need to actively prove who we are. For proving identity, we rely on ECDSA, the Elliptic Curve Digital Signature Algorithm. If ECDH is how we share a secret, ECDSA is how we sign our name in digital ink. It allows a system to cryptographically sign a message using its own private key. Anyone else can then use the corresponding public key to verify that the signature is absolutely legitimate. This provides two huge things: authenticity, proving exactly who sent the message, and integrity, proving the message hasn't been tampered with in transit. But it also provides something called non-repudiation. Let's say a bank receives a $1 million transfer request signed with your private key. They have mathematical proof it came from you because only you hold that private key. You can't later go to a judge and say, hey, I never sent that. That undeniable mathematical proof is non-repudiation in action. For the software engineers watching, implementing this in Java does not mean you have to write thousands of lines of cryptographic math yourself. Instead, you rely on established security providers. Often, the standard Java libraries might lack the most cutting-edge curve implementations, so developers frequently plug in the Bouncy Castle library, which robustly fills in those gaps. When you set up your cipher object for encryption, you simply call ECIS, which stands for Elliptic Curve Integrated Encryption Scheme. And for signing documents, you'd use a parameter like SHA-256 with ECDSA. That basically tells Java in just one line of code, hey, mathematically squish this data down first using a SHA-256 hash, and then sign that resulting hash with my elliptic curve private key. It's that straightforward. If you are building a secure backend system, here is the exact execution flow you absolutely must follow. First, you hash the data to create a tiny digital fingerprint. Second, you sign that fingerprint with your private key. Third, you send both the raw data and the signature across the network. But step 4 is absolutely critical. The receiving server must always verify the signature using the public key before doing absolutely anything else. Listen, if you try to process or decrypt tampered data first before verifying it, attackers can bog down your servers with endless streams of garbage data. They'll burn right through your CPU and memory in what's known as a denial of service attack. So verify first, always, to protect your system resources. And while we're talking best practices, here is a vital warning straight from our source text. Never, ever mix your keys. You must generate one key pair purely for encryption and decryption, and a completely separate key pair exclusively for digital signatures. Reusing the exact same mathematical key for both operations opens up subtle but frankly catastrophic loopholes.
Clever attackers can actually manipulate the math of a signature request to inadvertently trick your server into decrypting a secret message. Keeping the keys separated strictly silos those operations and maintains an ironclad security posture. Okay, Section 5, the showdown, RSA versus ECC. Why exactly is the entire tech industry forcing this massive upgrade? When we put these two heavyweights head-to-head, RSA definitely remains our safe but clunky station wagon, and ECC is our streamlined sports car. The real knockout punch here is the sheer disparity in key size. To remain secure against modern brute force attacks, RSA requires massive keys, often upwards of 3,072 bits long. Multiplying numbers that gigantic requires intense mathematical heavy lifting. Now, on a massive cloud server farm, that's expensive but manageable. But on a smartphone, or a smart thermostat, or an Internet of Things device, it completely crushes the processor and drains the battery incredibly fast. ECC, however, uses highly efficient keys. It operates on minimal power, making it the undeniable champion for our modern, mobile-first world. Just think about the sheer scale of this difference for a second. 256, a tiny 256-bit ECC key, gives you the exact same impenetrable cryptographic armor as a massive 3072-bit RSA key. That is literally an order of magnitude reduction in computational weight. You get top-tier protection without sacrificing any speed or battery life, and it's all thanks to the brilliant geometry of plotting curves on a graph instead of trying to factor giant prime numbers. It's just beautifully efficient. But there is an elephant in the room that we cannot ignore. As brilliant as ECC is, it's not going to be invincible forever. Both RSA and ECC rely on classical mathematical problems, integer factoring for RSA, and that discrete logarithm problem we talked about for ECC. The issue is that future quantum computers will be able to run specialized routines, like Shor's algorithm, which can slice through these very specific math problems in minutes instead of millennia. Now, don't panic yet. Quantum computers are mostly in their infancy today and aren't a practical threat to your smartphone right now. But the clock is absolutely ticking. Cryptographers globally are already racing to build entirely new post-quantum algorithms as a backup plan. So, when quantum computing finally matures and inevitably breaks both our reliable station wagon and our high-speed sports car, what completely new realm of mathematics are we going to have to discover to secure our digital future? Honestly, that is the billion-dollar question keeping the brightest minds in cryptography awake at night. Thank you so much for joining me today to explore the elegant power of elliptic curve cryptography. We'll see you on the next explainer.